Okay, so today we are diving into a story coming out of Somalia,
Okay.
a nation that has obviously been struggling to rebuild after decades of conflict.
Right.
We're kind of taking a look at a recent development project that honestly, on the surface, seems like a sign of progress. But as we dig deeper, you'll see why this story is so fascinating.
Yeah, this is a really, I think, telling example of how complicated development can be.
Exactly.
You know, the interplay of political, economic, and kind of almost ethical considerations in a country that's striving to rebuild after such a difficult recent history.
Absolutely. So this story centers around President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed and this new housing project called Zibtaluka, or Pearl Coast, which is being built in Mogadishu. Now, the interesting part is that this project isn't being spearheaded by the government.
Okay.
It's actually being undertaken by a private company owned by President Mohammed himself.
Interesting.
And this was, reported on by Ghetto Times, which is a Somali news outlet.
Yeah.
And it kind of raises some eyebrows, right?
It does, yeah. I mean, especially in a country like Somalia, which, let's be frank, has a reputation for corruption.
Yeah.
A story like this, I mean, it's bound to generate discussion and, scrutiny, right?
Yeah.
The article even mentions Somalia being among the most corrupt countries globally, so.
Right. And the article goes on to say that the president sees this housing project as a symbol of Somalia's recovery, a step towards a new era of governance.
Okay.
But then you have this other detail, which is that before becoming president, he established several businesses which dutifully pay taxes, but don't bank with the Somali Central Bank.
Yeah.
So it's just like, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting detail. I mean, the Somali Central Bank is obviously a key institution trying to stabilize the economy and promote transparency.
Right.
And for a company, especially one with ties to the president, to choose to operate outside of that system, that raises questions, right?
It does.
It kind of throws a wrench into this narrative of progress and transparency.
It feels like there's, more to the story than meets the eye.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of reconcile these seemingly contradictory pieces of information? Sure. We have the president, very publicly promoting a private development project while also having these business dealings that seem, a little opaque, especially, again, in a country struggling with corruption. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is unfortunately not uncommon. We often see, especially in developing countries, this blurring of the line between personal gain and national interest.
Right.
It's entirely possible that this project is a genuine attempt to, stimulate the economy, to provide much needed housing, maybe even to attract foreign investment.
Yeah.
But, and it is a big but, the lack of transparency, especially regarding his companies and how they're run, are they actually paying taxes? What are they doing with the profits? This casts a big shadow.
Yeah. And it makes you think about the potential consequences for Somalia, right? If his companies are benefiting even indirectly from his presidency, is there an uneven playing field for other developers? What does this say about fair competition, about attracting, legitimate investment in Somalia?
Absolutely. It's not just about the immediate impact, but the long-term consequences as well.
Totally.
If potential investors get the sense that it's all about who you can do, not what you can offer, that's going to deter them.
And what about the thing we were talking about earlier about rebuilding trust? Because if people see their leaders potentially profiting from their positions, it just erodes the faith in the whole system, right?
Exactly. And that trust is absolutely crucial, particularly in a country like Somalia. They've been through so much. Rebuilding trust in institutions is fundamental for lasting peace and development.
It's like, it's like trying to build a house on unsteady ground.
Yeah.
You can't have sustainable development if you don't have that solid foundation of transparency, of accountability.
Precisely. And this is where, that we don't have information on, we don't know what oversight mechanisms are in place for projects like this in Somalia. The Ghetto Times article doesn't really get into the weeds on how projects are vetted, how contracts are awarded, or if there are any measures in place to prevent conflicts of interest.
It does kind of leave us with more questions than answers. So I guess to wrap up, for our listeners, what's the takeaway? How should they kind of, make sense of this story? And not just as a one-off event, but as kind of a reflection of these larger global issues.
I always encourage people to be really critical thinkers, especially when it comes to news from parts of the world with complicated political situations. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in a narrative of, oh, this is progress, this is great.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to dig a little deeper, ask who benefits, ask what are the potential downsides, and maybe most importantly, is there enough transparency to ensure accountability?
Absolutely.